Sorry, kumain muna akong 3 pirasong tomato kasi kanina pa tumutunog yung tiyan ko. Annyeong! So, I have safely arrived in the Philippines. Korea, girl! I have arrived safely in Korea. I finished my 10-day quarantine period and I've spent a few days outside seeing what's around our neighborhood and what's in our city. Ang saya maglakad-lakad. After being in quarantine for 10 days, it's really nice to go out and just walk and just see the trees and feel the actual air. Although it is super cold, siguro namamatay na ako sa lamig dito. Pero buhay pa naman, kaya pa naman. Now that I have kinda adjusted, I wanted to share with you a few things you should know before coming to Korea. These are based on my personal experiences and a little bit of research, so I encourage you to do your own research to make sure that you can arrive in Korea safely. These are the things that you need to do before your flight. First and foremost, you will need the right kind of documents in order for you to enter South Korea, most especially your valid passport and a valid visa. So check and double check if you can enter South Korea with those documents. Second would be a flight ticket. Kasi, paano ka pupunta dito, di ba? Unless maglalakad ka. The airline that I took was Korean Airline and I took a one-way ticket. That costed me around $390, which is sobrang mahal. Pero the price of flight tickets varies a lot, so you should check with the different kinds of airline, different kinds of dates, and every other factors that will affect the price of your ticket. Number 3, PCR test. Especially with the COVID travel restrictions, the PCR test is a must. The validity of the PCR test was at 72 hours within departure time. However, on January 20, 2022, it has changed. The PCR test's validity should be within 48 hours of departure time. This is because of the increase of COVID cases in both countries. So make sure to check the PCR test requirements on the date of your flight because it can change a lot. 4. Quarantine requirements. So Korea has a 10-day quarantine policy for all individuals coming into the country. So there are 2 types of places that you can stay for your mandatory 10-day quarantine. First is self-quarantine at your own residence. This is of course if you have your own place at Korea. And if you are going to live with a family member, there are some restrictions and rules that you need to follow. In my case, I did a self-quarantine in our own home, thankfully, and I live with my brother. However, we have separate rooms. I have to wear a mask at all times. Second would be a government-managed quarantine facility, which you have to pay for your own. There are specific facilities and specific hotels that are for this kind of purpose. Another note would be your transportation from the airport to your quarantine facility. People who have just entered the country are not allowed to take the public transit, so you have to find your own mode of transportation for you to reach your quarantine facility. You can be picked up by your family member, or in my case, I booked a 방역 taxi or a very specific taxi for this purpose. There's already a set division from the driver's seat and the passenger seat. Make sure to book all of these quarantine facilities and quarantine transportation before your flight for you to safely arrive in South Korea. Let's move on to things that you need to bring. First and foremost, of course, your passport and your flight ticket, because without those you can't actually board the plane. Second would be, I would advise you to have a physical copy of the negative PCR results because people will keep on asking to check those in every spot and you will have to surrender this at some point at the Korean airport. And lastly, a phone. Because before you exit the Incheon airport, you will be asked to download a specific app for your self-quarantine, which is this app. You have to log on the app twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, and then you check your temperature of the day and then you check off all the symptoms that you have and then submit it. It's also the way for them to track your location and your symptoms, so you definitely need to bring a phone with you. Moving on to the actual 10 days quarantine. For the first day, you need to go to your nearest 보건소 or public health center for your first PCR swab test. You have to bring an ID and a phone with you because you have to fill out a document. You will also be needing a Korean phone number because that's how they will tell you about your PCR results. And at the 보건소 or the public health center, they usually give you a small package which contains different goodies. For the rest of your quarantine days, you have to religiously log on to the quarantine app. Some packages may arrive at your quarantine facility. I got 2 packages. The first package was a box full of food and goodies that you can eat during your quarantine period. And the second box that I got was more quarantine goodies like alcohol and masks. And there was a piece of document that I had to fill up, take a photo, and send to the number written on that paper. Make sure to read everything that's being sent to you for you to know what you have to do. For the 9th day of your quarantine, you have to go take your second PCR swab test at your nearest 보건소. It's the same procedure as the first day. You have to bring an ID and you have to bring your phone because you have to fill up a document, and they will again give you the results via text the next day. For your 10th day, which is your last day, your quarantine ends on 12 noon. Make sure that you have received a text message of your PCR results and an update regarding your quarantine situation. They sent a text message that my quarantine was over and to make sure that I wear mask at all times when I go outside and practice social distancing. And ayun, after all that 10-day quarantine, you are finally free and you can go out and do what you want safely. So if you want to come to Korea, make sure you do your research for you to safely travel around. Yun lang. Bye! Kita-kits na lang po dito. Charot!